Someone you love rings at 10 o'clock at night and they tell you they need you. You're in the car a few minutes later. You've got your coat over your pajamas. You've got your keys. There's no deliberation. You don't have to weigh it up. You don't have to have a little committee that meets in your head about whether you deserve to go. Now, try asking yourself for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Not a spa weekend. 20 minutes to sit down with a cup of tea and do absolutely nothing and watch what happens. The list arrives. The washing, the email, the thing you said you'd do for someone. And underneath the list, quieter and much more effective, is the feeling. That low, kind of sour hum that says, who do you think you are? So you'll drive across a city at 10 o'clock at night for a person you love. You won't give yourself 20 minutes on a sofa. So that's not a character flaw. That's actually a training outcome. And I want to spend today taking it apart because I think this one belief is costing you more than almost anything else in your life. I want to talk to you about Florence Nightingale because most people know exactly one thing about her, and it's the wrong thing. The lamp, the Crimean hospital, the lady moving between the beds at night. That's the image. But what most people don't know is what happened afterwards. So Florence Nightingale came home in 1856, and within a couple of years, she was largely housebound. So chronically, seriously unwell, probably from an infection she picked up during the war, and she stayed that way for decades. And here's the extraordinary part. She did her most consequential work from that bed. But you didn't know this. It was sanitary reform, hospital design, statistics, actual pioneering statistical work that changed how governments understood death rates. She reshaped the whole architecture of public health, lying down for something like 30 years. So she was ferocious about care, absolutely ferocious about the conditions that keep people alive. She wrote about ventilation and light and rest and warmth with the intensity of someone who had watched what happens when these things weren't there. And she drove herself into the ground. She could see with total clarity what every other human being needed in order to not break. But she simply couldn't extend the same reasoning to herself. So her needs were, in her own mind, a really different category of things. Negotiable, postponable, maybe slightly embarrassing. And you know that Florence Nightingale split. You do it every day. And let's talk about why. If you're a caregiver by profession or by role or even by temperament, and let's be honest, most of you are all three, then somewhere very early on, your worth got welded to your usefulness. Not consciously, nobody sat you down, but you learned that being needed was reliable, and being needed felt like love, and over enough years being needed became the thing you are rather than a thing that you do. Okay? I'm sure many of you are understanding this, which means that rest doesn't just feel unproductive. It actually feels like an identity crisis. If I'm not being useful right now, then what am I exactly? And that's why the word self-care makes you flinch, because the way the world sells it back to you, it's a candle and a bath bomb and a small indulgence you're supposed to earn by being sufficiently depleted first. And of course that feels selfish because it's been framed as a treat. And I want to name the specific moment because it's so precise, it's almost funny. You sit down, actually not sit, you perch on the arm of the sofa halfway to somewhere else. And within the next 9 seconds, the guilt arrives. Not a thought exactly, more like a physical rise in your chest, a restlessness in your legs, an urge to stand up and do literally anything. That spike isn't information, it's a reflex. So it's a groove worn into you by decades of repetition, and it will fire whether or not you actually need to be doing something, because grooves don't assess the situation, they just fire. They're habits, which means you can let it arrive, notice it, and stay sitting down anyway. Because your guilt that you feel isn't a verdict, it's a habit with your body attached. So let's redefine it properly. Self-care isn't a treat. It's maintenance. I don't know anybody who thinks it's indulgent to put oil in your car. Nobody thinks it's decadent to charge your phone. You don't earn those things by driving far enough. You do them because the thing doesn't run without them. And running something to destruction isn't a virtue. It's poor management. And here's where the research gets genuinely interesting, because the intuition most people have is exactly backwards. The assumption is that if you're hard on yourself and you put yourself last, you're going to be a better carer. But actually, it's the other way around. Higher self-compassion is associated with lower burnout and lower compassion fatigue in all of the caring professions, and with more capacity to be present for other people, not less. So the people who treat themselves decently have more to give, not because they're taking, but because they're not bleeding out quietly in the background. And there's also the hard data, and I say this gently because I'm not interested in frightening you, but I did find a study, okay? It was published in 1999, and it followed elderly spousal caregivers. And it found that those reporting significant strain had a meaningful, elevated risk of dying over the following 4 years compared to non-caregivers. So caregiving without support isn't a neutral act performed on your behalf by some kind of inexhaustible machine, which is you. It happens inside a body. It happens inside yours. So the real distinction isn't between selfish and selfless. That is the wrong comparison. The real distinction is between self-care and self-abandonment. Self-care is what lets you keep showing up as a person rather than as a function. Self-abandonment, this is what happens when you keep giving from a system that's already empty and it doesn't produce better care. Right? Like the well, I always say to you, can't take water out of a well that's empty. And if you do, you become resentful. You become short. You become flat. You know, that particular flat, that hollow way of being present with someone while you're not really being there at all. You know that feeling? Sitting with a person you love and having nothing left to bring to them. So depleted people don't give better care. They give more resentful care. And when the objection arrives, and it will, the one that says, but they need more, they need this more than I need this, I want you to hear how the sentence actually ends. They need me more than I need this, so I will spend myself down to nothing, and then I'll be no use to anyone at all. So that's not devotion. That's a plan with a very predictable ending. And there's one more thing which I'd like you to think about, even if you throw out everything else I've said today. The people around you are learning from you. They're not learning from your advice, they're learning from your behavior. So your daughter is learning what a woman does with her own needs. Your colleagues are learning what your job requires of a person. Whoever watches you most closely is quietly absorbing a rule about what people are for, and they're taking it from the way you treat yourself when you think nobody's looking, which means the 20 minutes on the sofa isn't only for you, it's a demonstration. It's you showing someone without a single word of instruction that a person is allowed to be a person. You'd want that for them. You'd insist on it for them. So the only question left is why they get the good rule and you get the old one. So here's your experiment for this week. It takes about 4 seconds. Which is why I chose it, because I know that if I give you a 20-minute practice, you'll skip it out of guilt. The pause before the yes. The next time someone asks anything of you, big, small, don't answer immediately. Take one full breath first. Feel your feet on the floor while you do it. One breath, that's all. And in that breath, ask yourself one question. What would I tell someone I love to do right now? And you already know the answer. You give that answer to other people constantly with warmth and clarity and total confidence. You just don't root it back to yourself. So this week, root it back. Now listen, you might still say yes, and that's wonderful. It's completely fine. This isn't about becoming a person who says no. It's about becoming a person who chooses instead of a person who reflexively complies and then feels quietly furious about it 3 days later. The choice lives in the breath. That's the only place it's ever lived. So if any of this has landed, here's your next step. Do the happiness quiz in the description. It is personalized. It only takes a few minutes. So taking care of yourself isn't taking away from anyone. You're not the resource. You're the person. I hope this has been helpful. As always, be kind, take care, go gently in the world.